I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 64. Today in the show, we're diving deep into the deer hunting secrets of renowned big buck hunter and host of Whitetail Freaks TV, Don Kiskey. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And has been the case lately, we've got another awesome guest on tap today, and that's Don Kiskey. And if you've watched any outdoor TV or DVDs over the last 10 years or so, you're likely familiar with Don. But if you're not, he, along with his wife Candy, host the show Whitetail Freaks TV, and they've also showed up on a number of other programs and DVDs over the years. But most importantly, Don and his family simply know how to kill big, mature bucks, and on an incredibly consistent basis. It's pretty amazing. Every year, I just see Don and his crew putting down big deer just year after year. So today our plan is to grill Don on all things whitetail. And by the end of this interview, my hope is that we'll have an in-depth peek into all of Don's philosophies when it comes to growing and killing giant, mature whitetails. And hopefully we're all going to learn a thing or two that we can apply to wherever we hunt, whether that's, in the big buck mecca of southern Iowa or in the rolling Appalachian hills of Virginia or southern Michigan or Georgia. Wherever it is, I think we'll all be able to learn something today. So before we get Don on the phone, though, Mr. Co-host Dan Johnson, you and me, we've got a few things to catch up on.
Right. But before we catch up on something, I would like to tell you about a dream I had last night.
Please do.
Okay. So when I got home from work today, I went right to the fridge and I ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay.
Is this the dream or is this real life?
This is real life.
Okay.
But the reason I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich after I got off work today was because of my dream last night. All right. So I'm in the tree stand, right? And I'm holding my bow in one hand and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the other hand. Okay, this is one of the craziest dreams I've had in a long time.
For some reason, this seems like normal for you. Like, I'm not surprised that you have a dream about eating a PB&J while hunting.
Right. Well, I got more than normal sleep last night. I got about like 6.5 hours of sleep last night as opposed to 4 or 5.
That's pretty good.
Right, so it gave me time to dream. Anyway, a deer, like this big buck, comes up this ridge, and it's in a place that I recognize in my dream. It's actually a place where I'm going to be setting a tree stand this August. And this deer is wearing a gold chain, like like rappers do, and I don't know why. So
gosh.
Like he's coming up this draw, and I'm debating on whether to take another bite of the sandwich or draw my bow back. So the cool thing about dreams is, they're not based on reality at all.
Right.
So the deer comes right in through one of my shooting lanes. I throw the peanut butter and jelly sandwich up in the air, draw back my bow, shoot the buck, catch the sandwich, and take a bite of the sandwich in this like one awesome movement.
That's the most amazing thing I might have ever heard.
Yeah, this is a dream that I will remember. And it's actually probably something I'm going to practice.
If you can pull that off, bravo.
The one hand peanut butter jelly, throw, shoot, catch, bite.
Oh, man. What did you eat last night before you went to bed?
I just had chicken breast and green beans. That was what we had for supper.
That's
and LSD.
Well, that'll explain
That's
it.
probably what did it.
That explains things.
That explains it.
Oh, geez. Well, that's a heck of a dream, man. I still don't know where I found you, like how this all happened.
Remember that time you gave a bum money? That was me.
Oh, man, that's funny. So you had a crazy dream, and since we last chatted, you also checked your trail cameras, and I'm particularly interested and excited about every time you check your cameras since you and me have got the big trail camera bet going on this summer. So I saw a little bit online, but can you fill us on how that camera pull went?
I tell you what, I had some decent bucks on camera. There are 3 deer. One's a 6-year-old, one's a 7-year-old, and one is I think he's a 4-year-old. All right. All 3 considered shooters. All right. Just based on maturity level alone.
Yeah.
I got history with 2 of them. One is Ryan Iberg. I blog about him all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And then another one's just a 3-year-old that I think I passed him last year, to be honest, as a like 125, 130-inch 8 that now he's another really good 8-pointer, but he's out wide and he's put on a whole bunch of mass.
And he's a 4-year-old. Wasn't he a 3-year-old last year and he's a 4-year-old this year? Yeah.
Yep, 3-year-old last year, 4-year-old this year. And then another 6-year-old buck who has a gigantic body. And he's really tight. He is the one of my last card pull that had all the junk on the bases.
Oh, is that Dork?
Yep, I call him Dork.
Yeah, that's a cool buck. I like that funky stuff.
Yep, just a mainframe 8 with all the junk is inside on its bases. So I believe I saw him at a distance one time last year. And other than that, every trail camera pick -1 has been of him nocturnal. So finding out where these deer are living is still, I mean, I've been hunting the same property 5 years now, and it's still, trying to find the right pinch points and bedding areas where these deer are bedding on certain winds. So it's going to take some scouting and some effort.
Well, I hope this is the year, though. Now that, especially this year, you get to hunt yourself.
Yep.
A lot more. I would love to see the story of Ryan Iberg come to a close.
Oh, man, me and you both. That would just be so awesome.
That would be incredible.
Yep. But, like I said, I was a little disappointed in the card pull because last year I had literally my best trail camera season ever with as far as maturity level and actually, points or a score of deer, like deer in the 180s and the 170s and the 160s tons. This year the score is low. I have 3 mature deer on camera, but of the 4 trail cameras that I put out, 2 of them took false pictures because I had a little, like one was a moth died on the eye of the camera, and the other one was like a beetle crawled up on it and shed its exoskeleton. Some bug did. So I had all these pictures of deer feet, and then on my other camera was all pictures of the tops of the trees.
That's brutal.
Yeah. So,
well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm kind of not sorry because it's probably helping my cause.
I know. I might actually, if I have to wear a Michigan State hat, I might lose friends. Just to let you know, my house might get egged.
I'm not going to feel bad about it either, Dan.
I know. I'm a man, and I make my own bed. But just to let you know.
Oh, I know. But I could get down to Ohio, and my cameras might not have taken any pictures since May. So there's a total chance I could get completely blanked since I haven't been able to check them at all.
Or you're going to have 6 pictures and it's 3 of me walking up and 3 of me walking away.
That could be too. We'd have some issues if that was the case.
Right.
Well, real quick, we got to get down on the line here, but I want to tell you about one more thing from me before we do get to the important stuff.
Right.
As you know, you and I are planning a mule deer hunt in the high country of central Idaho this coming September, right?
Yep.
And since I'm living out here, we decided I was going to try to go out and do some scouting to go check this place out. Well, I finally got to do that this weekend.
Okay.
And it's been kind of a little bit of a debacle. We originally planned to go out and do this trip a few weeks ago, and then we drove out there, and then some stuff happened, and I wasn't able to make the trip. And then, finally, this most recent trip, we were able to finally get out there, but again, had some challenges. So, really quickly, I'm not going to bore you with the long story of this whole trip. But as I told you before I went, I found a trail that heads into this alpine lake that we had gotten some intel on that we wanted to hunt. And this trail was supposed to be 8.5 miles in and was supposed to be a relatively easy hike in. So my plan was I was going to bring my wife and my dog Boone, and since we have nowhere else to put him, our little lap dog Cooper. And we were going to hike in there this easy 8.5 miles. I was going to spend the evening scouting all night, and then the next morning I was going to scout in the morning, and then we have an easy hike out in time to get back here to work for some meetings we had. Well, long story short, what was supposed to be 8.5 miles was more like 12. The guide and the map was completely wrong. It was a hell march, like a death march in there. We never made it to the lake because it was so far, and the trail was all messed up. Nothing was marked. Nothing was maintained. We were crawling up and over logs and deadfalls, and we thought we were lost. And I've done a lot of mountain stuff and a lot of backpacking, and we've been out here all summer. And this trail just kicked our butts. And my dog got injured. His feet are all tore up. He can't walk now, so he's just laying on the ground all bandaged up. Like I said, we never made it to the lake. And I finally got up into the general area of it, and we couldn't go any further. So it was like late. We thought we were gonna get in like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, based on our typical mileage, how fast we go. We didn't even stop until like almost 8 o'clock, and we still hadn't got to the lake. So we just need to stop. So we pull off, and then I hiked even further on my own with my binos and camera, tried to find something. Never could get to the lake. I scouted all the hillsides, all the mountain basins, everything. I didn't see a single deer, and because of the fact that it took so much longer for us to get in, I had to leave at 4:30 to pack up camp and hike out in the dark this morning to get out like the 12 miles or 13 miles or whatever it was to get back to the car to get in time for our meeting. So in general, the scouting trip was an absolute debacle. And and this is the first I've told you, but for everyone listening, I haven't told Dan about this at all. So I'm sorry for the horrible surprise and bad news here, Dan. But it was not good. And we're going to have some discussions about what options we might have, because, to be honest, unless we can find a different approach to get in there, I don't think there's any chance that we should do this. There's no way, and that wasn't even up into like the stuff where where we would actually want to be hunting. It'd be like 13, 14 miles just to get up into the spots, I think, where the deer would actually be.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it was.
And I went on I weighed my pack yesterday, and it was a total of 82 pounds is what I went on a walk with yesterday. And it kicked my butt, and I was just walking the back roads in Iowa.
Right.
So imagine going in with 50 pounds or 40 pounds on my back with all my gear. That would definitely kill a flatlander like me.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Is like if as much stuff as I've been doing in the mountains, if this is kicking our butt, if we added on all of our hunting gear, and if we were trying to pack out a deer, it would just be a nightmare. So we're gonna have to off air. We're gonna have to do some talking.
Have a conversation, yeah, for sure.
Have a conversation and re-examine our options, because this I don't know, man. It was tough. It was a bad situation all around. So. I don't know. The adventure continues, and we haven't even got out there yet.
One more quick thing before we get down on the line is we can never skip another week again. because I damn near got hate mail from our followers saying, so what's the deal? I haven't seen a post yet. I guess we can't take breaks is what I'm getting at.
No, people weren't happy that we didn't have a podcast last week. I saw the same thing. I'll take full responsibility for that. I had family in town, so I decided to take some time off work to hang with family. But we got a good one this week, so hopefully that'll make up for it.
And I tell you what, with all these awesome guests and all this information that we're providing our listeners, I have a feeling that the deer harvest will be going up this year. As far as mature deer is going to be going up this year.
I think so too. I think I've been really happy with what we've been able to learn from all of our guests, and this year it's been a good year, and I think we've only got better things on tap. We've got some really cool guys and girls coming on the show later that have already got scheduled for the next couple months, so I think it's just going to keep on getting better. Sounds good. This has been a pretty long intro. So I'd say we should talk to someone who really knows what he's doing when it comes to whitetails and get Don on the line. Would you agree?
I say we do it.
All right, here goes. All right, with us on the line now is Don Kisky. Welcome to the show, Don.
Hey, thank you very much.
Yeah, we are excited to have you on the line. We've been having some really great guests on the podcast here recently. Just last week, we had Mark Drury on the show, and he had some fascinating things to share. And so we're really excited to follow that up with you because I think right along there with Mark, you are one of the most renowned whitetail hunters, at least that I've seen in the public eye when it comes to patterning and hunting and growing big mature whitetails. And what I was hoping we can do today is really dive deep into everything you learned over all of your years hunting deer. And, hopefully there'll be some things that we can all take away from it. So before we dive into all of that, which I'm really excited about, for the few people that maybe aren't familiar with who you are or what you're doing with Whitetail Freaks, could you just give us a brief overview of what Whitetail Freaks is all about?
Sure, no problem. We're just a team of guys and girls who manage our property. We try to raise the oldest and the biggest bucks we can. We like to build history to them, find the sheds, film them in velvet, take trail pictures to them, do everything we can to know that buck as well as possible so they get to the mature age and hopefully harvest that buck when he's good and mature. That's kind of the way I'll do it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed the most about your show. I've been able to watch it over the years and seen your DVDs too. I think I own DVD 3 through 6 I think I have so far. But what I've always enjoyed is that you guys, like you mentioned, you build history with these deer, and there's that story. And I think both Dan and I have been able to enjoy that history building with some deer of our own, and it's pretty fascinating to do that, and it's also really challenging. And I imagine that's something you've probably experienced, that challenge over the years too, right?
Oh, for sure. But we're really lucky that we own and have a lot of ground to do it on. And I live in the great state of Iowa, which allows me $3 a year. And years ago, I don't know if you knew this or not, I actually started with Mark Drury when he started the very first Monster Buck series.
Yeah.
And we escalated from there into my own Whitetail Freaks, and that's how this all came about. But, we got plenty of playground, and you have to have that to be able to have this big a number of mature animals to do it on.
Yeah, I think on one of the Drury's Boontown DVDs, kind of a collection of their top Boone and Crockett bucks, I remember seeing a hunt of yours with those guys. That it was early Don Kiskey days, I believe, when I saw that.
That was way, way, way back.
Yeah, good stuff though. But something you mentioned just a second ago, the fact that you need good ground to grow some of these deer. I'm curious if that's related to the first question that I was going to ask you. And what I really wanted to do to kick things off, I know that when we talk to anyone about hunting and growing mature whitetails, there's a whole litany of different things that all go into it. It's a huge puzzle, and there's a lot of pieces. But if you had to choose just one single thing of your various strategies or your process or whatever you do throughout the year, if you had to pick your one most important aspect of your hunting strategy that leads to your success, what would that single most important piece be?
Probably the single most important is a little bit general, but it's just scouting in general and knowing the deer by use of either finding them in velvet, because I scout all summer long. I walk the river bottoms. I know these deer. I got all the trail cameras out. I already have all my hit list built before the fall ever gets here. I know exactly which farms hold the biggest buck, so I know which farms to target. So if I didn't scout, you wouldn't have a starting point. there's some farms that I don't have anything I even want to shoot on, so I won't even hunt that farm for the year. So it's very important to run all these trail cameras, scout all summer long, and just, like I said, picking the sheds up, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
That way I'm targeting the farms that have the biggest numbers of 5- and 6-year-old deer.
So this is really timely then, given the fact it is summer. What can you give us details in regards to what your summer scouting regiment looks like? You mentioned you're walking river bottoms and you mentioned trail cameras, but can you tell us, in detail when June, July, August show up? What are you doing when it comes to whitetails?
About July 20th, actually, right now is when I really start. I just started putting all my cameras out. But as far as scouting for the deer, most of the deer in my area, they gravitate towards the river bottoms. Usually, that's obviously where the water is. Got all the crops up and down the river bottoms. You got soybeans, corn. When the corn is shooting ears, the deer are very tough to see, obviously. The corn's 10 foot tall, all the deer are in the corn. But when the soybeans get up to about waist tall, the big bucks start to really feel comfortable so they can walk out in the soybeans. Well, we'll scout some of these soybean fields. I'll dive into the river, I'll walk up, and I'll pop up the creek bank and overlook the whole soybean field. I got my spotting scope, my Nikon scope and glasses with me, and I actually film through the spotting scope when I see these deer. But sometimes you'll see bachelor bucks of groups of 15 to 20 different bucks in the summertime. So it's an awesome way to really take your inventory.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I've always noticed when it comes to scouting these summer bucks, and one of the challenges is that, at least from what I've seen, what a lot of people I've talked to have noticed, is that a lot of these bucks in the summer, they're relocating after the velvet comes off in early September,
right.
Some percentage. So how much is your summer scouting actually helping you when it comes to actual hunting season targeting these bucks?
It seems to me like, at least on my place, 90% of the bucks that I find, they will stay there for hunting for the fall. They don't go anywhere, but like you said, you got that small percentage. For some reason, they summer on me, then they disappear, and they'll relocate 2 to 3 miles away. But you just have to assume that they're going to be there, and you just go from there, I guess.
Yeah. Are you looking for anything other than just saying, okay, this 6-year-old buck is on this property, and okay, so we know he's here? Or are you, when you're doing these scouting sessions, are you actually paying attention to he used this food source of the west wind, or this cold front passed through so that pulled these? Do you look at any of those details, or are you just trying to determine if that given deer is on this farm?
I'm pretty much, at that time of the year, I'm pretty much looking to build his home core area, so to speak. I'll have a camera out on one field, I take his picture. A half a mile away, I'll take his picture, and I found a shed, let's say a quarter mile from there. You start to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and you can get a great idea from year to year exactly which area that deer summers in, then in the fall, which area he moves to. And you have to be on top of all that so you're not spending your time in the wrong spot.
Yeah. So what about trail cameras? You just mentioned that you're running trail cameras in different spots and finding that core area. What does your summer trail camera strategy look like? What are you putting them over? Where are you putting them? How often are you checking them? Would love to hear more on that.
Yeah, the trail cameras to me is just pretty much all summer long just an inventory tool. I don't pay any attention, for coming up in the fall that I'm going to hunt that particular field that I've been taking this picture. I just put 2 or 3 bushel of corn out where it's legal here in Iowa. You can do that. Or put them over mineral licks is a great spot too, but we set these cameras up. Like I said, you can probably take almost 100% of my bucks. I'll take over a mineral lick or a corn pop in the summertime. So it's just a super tool to know all your deer. But I don't put any faith in that at all until I start taking pictures of those deer come fall, more towards September. And then you can start paying attention to where you're taking the pictures at.
Yeah. Do you have any there's lots of different, we've talked to a number of different people that kind of talk about the whole risk-reward piece of trail cameras. And there's obviously the reward of learning something, but then there's also the risk of educating deer whenever you go in there to check them.
Right.
What's your take on that? How often are you checking these cameras? Is there any certain things that you do to minimize that risk?
In the summertime, I don't even worry about it. My little girl half the time is on my bad boy buggy with me, and she's walking around with bare feet. So you can get by with anything in the summertime. I've taken pictures of booners right after she's been walking around or right after I've been there. It's a little different come hunting season, but in the summer, you don't have to worry about that as much. I will check these cameras probably, I'm just guessing, every 3 days. I'll probably have 700 or 800 photos on every camera. And I'm probably running 30 cameras, so it's a full-time job doing it. But there's no really science to it. I probably have at least probably a camera out per 100 acres taking inventory on these deer.
Wow.
You got to be careful not having enough cameras out for sure.
Right.
They get pretty stuck in their summertime patterns, and sometimes just a quarter mile away, they won't ever walk into that field. So you got to make sure you have plenty of them out.
So then, how does that shift then once you get closer to hunting season, or actually during the hunting season? What changes when it comes to cameras for you?
Yeah, come hunting season, I totally switch all my cameras onto scrapes and pinch points and filled edges and things like that. Places where I can check that camera and it's going to actually help me in the hunting situation. I'm not just taking inventory now. Now I'm trying to see what he's doing, what time he's coming through, which seldom works for you. But like I said, the scrapes, you can take inventory of all your bucks on scrapes. It's a great way to get a good look at them. So another really cool thing we're doing is taking movies of these deer over scrapes, so you can get some really cool footage.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the things that, I keep on thinking back to some of these more recent interviews. We've talked about the scrapes are awesome for pictures. Do you have any issues, or have you noticed any issues once you mentioned the fact with the video? Have you seen any reactions to your cameras from deer? Any negative reactions? Are you spooking any deer with those when the film's taking, or are your deer relatively habituated?
When you start taking the movies of the deer, it's not like you just have the infrareds come on for a second and then takes a picture. Now your infrareds on that camera are coming on, staying on, and they can get a little goofy on them. You're not going to run them out of the country, but I've seen them take off and come back, 10 minutes later. Eventually they'll get used to it. They'll see the red light come on, and they'll kind of settle down. But I wouldn't be too concerned about blowing a deer clear out of the country by using cameras. I've never seen that happen. So.
Okay, so Dan, you're pretty quiet over there. Being a Southern Iowa hunter yourself, what are your thoughts on these scouting techniques that Don's mentioned so far?
I have a question regarding pressure on your properties. Mm-hmm. Now, you're a farmer. Do any of your farms have livestock on them? And if so, how does that livestock affect deer movement?
Yeah, some of my farms do have livestock on because there's ground that I lease and the farmers run cattle. Most of the farms, they got the cattle out September 1, but I'm not a big fan of having the cattle in there. Yeah, they will coexist together, but it's not the best thing to have. With that being said, some of my best spots are places in cattle pastures, so I wouldn't, it's not a big detriment, but if I had my perfect world, I would definitely not have the cattle in there, but come hunting season.
Do you ever actually see them, deer or mature bucks, using parts of the property where the cattle are actually present? From my personal experience, I've seen, like you mentioned, they will still use those areas if the cattle are in the general area. But like if there's a bunch of cattle within 100 yards of me and I'm seeing the cattle, I personally haven't seen deer moving through there. But have you actually seen them when the cows are there?
I have. I've actually shot deer, and I've had cows in sight within 50 yards of my stand, but it's not the best situation, and it doesn't happen very often. I have seen them a lot of times during the rut. These bucks will blow these does out in the middle of these weird spots like cattle pastures, and that's a lot of times those areas can really heat up because they're blowing these does out of the good spots, out of the places like my farm that's got all these food plots. Well, they'll end up on the neighbor over there that's got cattle everywhere and one little skinny ditch up through it. Well, and that's where you'll see a big buck with a doe, but he blew her out there because there's no other deer there.
Yeah. So one last thing on taking a step back on scouting during the season, other than trail cameras, are you doing any of the observation type scouting during the season? Are you, sitting on a road? You are. Can you tell us about that?
Well, during bow season, we don't do much because the morning and night we're hunting all through the season until late season comes, and that's when we start doing a lot of scouting in the mornings and evenings. At a distance, watching see which pop the deer are coming out on, and sometimes in the mornings, late season is not as good, so it's a good time to go scouting. We just get on a high spot and overlook the whole country and try to get an idea of what the deer are doing. A perfect example of that was a buddy of mine, Jacob Landry, and I was hunting, and we saw this buck come in. It was a big old 180 buck come in bed, and I couldn't get a shot at him in the morning, but if we wouldn't have been out there, it wasn't a perfect tree stand to be setting in, but it was a good one for observation. So we saw this buck, he bedded, got lucky that night and come back around and actually killed that deer later. So you need to be out there no matter what. Even if the deer aren't moving, you need to be scouting for them.
Wow.
I have a quick question about your scouting tactic. And are you staying out? Are there any areas that you're staying out of? We've had some guests in the past say they go about business as usual. They don't worry about going into and spooking deer because in a way the deer are conditioned. And then we've had guests in the past say, no, we're not even stepping foot in there except to hunt.
Right.
What's your tactic on that?
Well, I'm not as bad as some people are, and I agree. There's a lot of guys who won't step foot on certain pieces of property. I do hunt it right, and I try to wait for the right time to step into some of these. And I try to be as low impact as absolutely possible. And by that I mean my entries and my exits to my tree stands or through a ditch or a creek where nothing can see you, nothing smells you. You don't lay scent trails. So I'm super careful in that regard. But there's not really any property I can see that's off limits, no.
What about something you mentioned there when you said you're hunting right, and timing I think is part of that.
Right.
And when it comes to late season, you had mentioned that maybe you're just going to scout in the mornings rather than hunt them. Can you tell us, are there any other parts of the year where you hunt certain times or don't hunt certain times or focus your efforts in a certain type of place based on the time of year?
Well, more so, yeah. I mean, early season, it's all about food. All October, I'm concentrating solely on the food sources in the evenings, only the bedding areas in the mornings. And then as you tighten down and get closer when the does are starting to come in, I'm really focusing on the morning bedding areas because that's where they're bumping all the does. And I'll try to pick stands where I can see further and do calling and rattling and stuff like that so you can get deer to respond to you. And then later in the season, you kind of move into a different strategy where you're tucking back into the tightest, heaviest bedding areas you can find. And again, late season, you move back into the food. So it all changes, yes, all year long,
Are you hunting mornings, like starting the 1st of October?
Well, usually I'm combining, but if it's wet, yes, we will hunt mornings. However, it's very, very tough. That's not my favorite time. The first 2 weeks of October, hunting in the mornings, my personal opinion is not good. But I have not got tons of experience hunting then because I'm always combining.
So when let's say you do hunt, there's a situation. Can you explain in detail a situation where you might be hunting mornings?
In
early
October.
Season in October, yes.
In October, well, I just again, I'm seeing these deer come out. I know where they're coming out and where they're coming to, on the trail cameras and stuff, or from scouting. So I know the general direction they're bedding, and then from having this farm for so many years, I just got a good idea where all the great bedding areas are. So it's just pretty simple. I'm just backing up, trying to catch them before, it gets light, or before it gets dark. They catch them in the daylight that way as they're coming through. The hard thing about the early season is sometimes they're already back to the bedding area, before the sun even comes up. So it's extremely hard to beat them in there. That's what I found.
Yeah, and the reason why Dan brings this up, this is an ongoing debate between Dan and myself about the risk versus reward of hunting those early October mornings. And it seems to be every person we talk to has got a different take on it. And me and Dan are constantly kind of evolving in our thoughts on October mornings too. But like you said, it's a tricky proposition. And right. I've always, not always, but more recently have leaned towards the fact that, especially in some of the places like where I hunt that are pretty heavily pressured, the risk seems in some cases much greater than the potential reward because, like you said, Don, lots of times these bucks are back into their beds before daylight even. So
exactly. Something that's kind of unfair is the fact that we do have so much ground to hunt. I can afford to mess up, some ground. But for the guy who has 100 or 200 acres and that's all he's got to hunt, you're going to have to be a lot more careful about, like you say, when you go in and if you're going to bump them in the mornings because you got to continually hunt that same property. Well, I can bump over here to another farm. I don't have to keep hunting that same property. We might bounce from this farm. We might hunt it once. I won't be back for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, wow.
So we really keep them fresh.
I was hoping you would say, yeah, we hunt every morning so I could rub it in Mark's face.
Well, I want to, but I have to work too.
Yeah.
Oh, if I'm not harvesting, I'm hunting out there no matter what, yes.
Now, before we move on to the next question for Don, we need to pause briefly to thank our partners at Sitka Gear who help make this podcast possible. Now, over the past couple weeks, we've had product category leader Dennis Zuck on the show to talk about different questions related to Sitka and the gear we use as whitetail hunters. Now, this week we're going to do something a little bit differently, as I want to share with you a quick update from something happening over at Sitka Gear right now, and that is their Diverge photo contest. It started earlier this month, and it ends July 31st. And with this contest, all of us can submit our best hunting-related photos to be judged, analyzed, and eventually, if you win, could lead to some pretty neat prizes from Sitka Gear. Now, Sitka is all about, as we've talked about, they're all about changing the hunting world, the hunting industry, how we look at hunting, how we approach hunting, and really that's the same deal with this photo contest. It's all about diverging from the usual. The usual hunting photo back in the day was a guy holding a buck's antlers and grinning, and that was the typical picture we saw for everything. Well, Sitka really has been promoting, and many of the people who like to use Sitka Gear believe in taking things to the next level and looking at photography from a more artistic, almost spiritual standpoint, really looking at the deeper aspect of things. So with the Diverge contest, the folks at Sitka are really looking for photos that take things to the next level. Now, there'll be a panel of renowned outdoor photographers and Sitka athletes looking at these photos, and they're going to be basing their judgments on authenticity, originality, artistic quality, emotional impact, lighting, composition, and technical mastery. They'll be selecting some finalists, and then it'll be open to votes for all of us to then choose who are the final winners in the whitetail category, the waterfowl category, and the big game category. Now, once those folks are chosen, the winners in each category will be printed, actually have their photos printed in the Sitka Insight mailing, and they'll also be winning an entire full Sitka Gear system, which will be pretty incredible. So if you're interested in joining and participating in the Diverge contest, go to sitkagear.com/diverge. That's sitkagear.com/DIVERGE, Diverge. You can submit your photos right there or post them on Instagram and use hashtag Diverge4. Make sure to join the contest. It's pretty cool. I just submitted a photo. Probably won't win, but I'm going to send it out there anyways. But hopefully you guys can all send in a photo to the Diverge photo contest. It's a pretty neat thing, and if nothing else, go on there, check out the entries. There's some incredible photography already up there, and I'm sure there's more to come. So now, back to Don and the show. So interesting thing you mentioned, the fact that you do have a lot of options. Does that change? Are you much more aggressive because of the fact that you know you can blow things out and still have other options?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll go for it. I don't get stupid sometimes, but I will probably do more than most guys would just for the fact that if I mess up, I've got another one I can go chase.
Yeah.
That does help.
Can you share with us how much land you do have access to out of curiosity?
Well, right now we own about 1,000 and I lease another 3,000, so about 4,000 acres.
Wow. So you do have options.
Have a few options, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. That's awesome.
On that property, then, in regards to hanging your tree stands, are all your tree stands hung before the season even starts, or do you micromanage your tree stand placement based on that year?
Well, we do based on that year. I mean, they are all hung, but that's all I'm doing midday. It seems like it's moving and changing, and you'd think I've been here for 15, 20 years. I have that figured out. I'm still, every year the crop rotation changes, neighbors plant something different. Everything, is different. So the deer do a little bit different things.
That's a good question, because I want to know, this year I have kind of noticed a trend on some of my farms, and I have a gut feeling it has to do with the rotation of the crops. Can you explain kind of your feelings on crop rotation and how that might affect deer movement?
Yeah, well, it's just a huge thing, crop rotation. If the neighbor has 500 acres of standing corn one year, then the next year he doesn't get in and it's all tall weeds, and the habitat changes that way. You get everything, not only just crop rotation, but you get the mass crop, the acorns, whether they're hitting the white oaks or not. It's a continual thing. So just because one area is hot one year, it doesn't mean it's going to be the next. You got to keep a close eye on the food sources for sure.
So in those cases where you do notice that something's different, it's during the season now. You mentioned that you're doing your stand, relocations during the midday, I think you mentioned, but can you elaborate?
Right, yep.
What does your stand adjustment strategy look like during the season? I'd love to hear about what conditions you wait for, if you're trimming lanes or not, or how careful you're not or are being. What's that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm super careful as far as that goes. I'm not a big guy on trimming. It's cost me a lot of times on big bucks. I don't go in there and just hack away at things. That never seems to pay off. When I do go in there, I usually want to do it by myself. I won't even let Candy go with me. I'll take the set down if it's in there, or take a new set in. When I get to the base of the tree, I'm putting the first few steps up, and I'm not laying anything on the ground. I'm keeping it as careful as I can, as scent-free as I can, and getting up that tree. You can't educate these deer. If they smell that scent trail on that first time in, that may be all it takes. And again, one of the things I like to say is that a lot of these places I access through the creeks and through ditches, so you're not burgering anything. So when I go in there, I know where I want to hang a stand. I'm going right up the middle of the ditch. I pop up the tree, and I get out of there. There's no entry trail. And I think that's really a big thing if you're going to be moving stands during season.
Yeah, I've done sometimes. I've tried to. It's not always, you're not always able to do this, but sometimes wait for like a slightly rainy day or a windy day to mask my sound. Do you wait for certain days like that, or do you just go for it when you have to?
No, that really definitely helps. Do anything you can. If you can afford to, wait for a rainy day for sure. I've even done it at night before. I actually had Dale Earnhardt up on his last hunt, and he wanted me to move a stand, so I did it at 10 o'clock at night, and it worked. So you just got to do whatever you have to do.
Yeah. So continuing with stands, now I'm curious, everyone kind of has their own unique quirks when it comes to how they like to set their stands. Do you have like a set, I always like my stands at this height, and I always want to have a ton of cover, and I set my tree stand behind the way I want the deer? Do you have a certain way that you like your stands hung, or is it always changing?
No, it's kind of always changed, but everybody hates my stands, as I said.
Why is that?
I love to be on the back side of the tree. I want to be able to hide. I just can't stand being bald, sticking out on the front side of the tree. I got to be able to be behind it. It's just one of my deals. And like I said, I'm not a big trimmer. I don't trim a bunch of stuff, but I'm not as huge on height as I used to be. I used to thought, 25, 30 foot. If the right situation is there, shoot 15 foot's great. The higher you get, the worse your shot angle is, and I kind of learned that more as you go along. Height isn't always the answer, but anyway, they're definitely always changing.
I like your take on being on the back side of the tree. That's how I set every one of my tree stands.
Well, I'm not a Lone Ranger then.
No, you're not.
Yeah, I just started trying that recently here too, and that actually, I probably wouldn't have killed my Ohio buck last year if I hadn't set the stand on the backside, because it was a situation where I had, very, very limited tree options, and there's one I had to be able to shoot to this location, and I had to decide, do I go in a tree that has not great cover but it's in the right location, or do I go in a tree with good cover but I don't think I'll be able to get the shot I can take? And in this situation, I, kind of like you mentioned, you went in the night to hang that stand. I went at like 3:30 in the morning to hang this stand, and I had to be in a, subpar tree, so I put the stand facing backwards, and this buck still spotted me just before I took a shot at him, but I had enough cover to at least, he was confused by it, and he didn't book it out of the country right away. So
that's right.
It definitely pays
off. Hunt the deer, not the perfect tree.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to ask you. Would you rather take the perfect spot with a subpar tree, or the perfect tree in the subpar spot?
Yeah, I want the perfect spot with a subpar tree.
Yeah.
I'll get up in anything. I've been in some stupidest trees you've ever seen. I've been in bushy oak trees that are 6 inches in diameter, and it looks just terrible up there. But if you got the right background cover, it's just amazing what you can get by with on small trees.
Yeah. Do you ever try creating cover in a tree? I hear some people, I've tried this, cutting limbs and sticking them in your tree stand, or doing different things like that to add cover. Have you ever done that?
No, I probably should. I have not done that, but I've seen a lot of other guys do that. It's not a bad idea. If you've got access to that, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I kind of like you. I should know I should do it more. I don't do it often enough.
Right, me either.
So what about wind? We've kind of touched on this with stand sites. Can you talk to us about how you're thinking about wind when setting a stand? Because one of the things we talk about a lot is there's thinking about wind in regards to your scent, making sure deer aren't going to wind you. And then we also talk about how you can use the wind by thinking about how a deer is going to use the wind moving into a spot. Do you consider both those things when you're setting stands, and can you elaborate on how you consider wind in that case?
Yeah, it means everything, absolutely, without a doubt. I've got, in a bedding area, I'll have stands in that exact bedding area for a north wind and for a south wind. I access the south wind stand from a different area. I mean, you come from different ways to get to it, so I can hunt that bedding area with any wind. Now, here lately, one of the best strategies we've been using is brushing these blinds into standing corn, which is absolutely lethal. Then you can get totally covered up. You're walking through the corn rows to get to your blind. You got the wind right in your face. There's no scent trail. This is just a deadly way to hunt. We've killed a lot of big bucks in the last few years doing that. So,
yeah, I've seen that on your shows recently. Can you sort of touched on a few of those things there, but can you give us the details on how you're setting these up and really all the details, what you're considering?
Yeah, we'll just go out on these farms and I'll find the best pinch points, the best spots that I like, and I'll actually go in there and plant standing corn to those areas. They're already great areas, but by planting the standing corn, it allows me, and especially here in southern Iowa when you have no trees to begin with, some of these plots don't have nothing on it. You can go in, you can plant the standing corn. We'll go up the corn rows, and go to the end where the corn stops. You can, if you partially pick corn or whatever it may be, pop your blind up. You can cut it out and do this in about 20 minutes or 30 minutes maybe. But when you stand back at a distance and look at it from like 15 yards, you can't even see it. The blind totally disappears. But it's super important when you do it. You're coming in the back of the corn rows. You're walking all the way into the back of the blind. And this is so effective. We've actually left this 70 or 80 deer in the field in front of us at 30 yards, and you can crawl out the back of the blind. It may take 30 minutes, but you can get out of there. So that allows you to repeatedly hunt the same blind over and over again and not spook those deer.
Wow.
So that's really been a good way to hunt for us.
Is there a minimum size plot that you could plant corn in? Because a lot of guys maybe with smaller properties, they can't plant 80 acres of corn, but maybe they could plant a small crop just in this type of, for this type of situation. Is there a minimum size you think someone needs to pull this off?
Well, for corn, if you're trying to do this for corn, the biggest thing about it is you got high deer numbers. Sometimes you got to plant 6 or 8 acres, excuse me, because the deer, they'll go in there and they'll ruin 2 or 3 acres of it by pulling the ears off and eating the stalks and the leaves and everything else. So they ruin so much of it, you got to have at least that many acres to have any corn left. So if somebody asked me, should I plant a 2-acre corn plot close to the timber's edge? Well, no, it's not going to make. That's the problem with planting so small. So you do have to have quite a few acres.
Okay, that's good to know. So that kind of is a nice transition to some of the habitat questions I had for you. You're obviously managing a lot of property. What are your top things that you are doing to improve that property for deer? Are you just focusing on food, or are you doing other habitat improvements too?
Well, we're trying to put as many acres as we can, like the buffer strips, into taller switchgrass and taller habitat like that. That's a really big thing. We've taken the buffer strips along the river that's like 120 foot wide, and we'll plant switchgrass. That's really improved the habitat for us. But anytime you can add any of the tall grasses to the mix, I think that's just an excellent thing to be doing.
Okay. And what about
are they bedding there, or is it just like a transition buffer strip when they exit the timber and come to the food?
Yeah,
like
it's not so much that they're bedding in it. It just makes them more comfortable. They come out quicker. I've seen them standing in the switchgrass, 6 to 8 foot tall, standing half out of it, eating soybeans, and they'll never even walk into the field. They'll just sit there and eat and then walk right back. It just makes them feel really comfortable, and it really holds a lot of deer on your property.
So do you do anything to your timber? Do you cut or hinge cut or do anything like that, or do you leave that as is, whatever timber you have?
Well, I need to be doing more of that. My neighbors, everybody around me started doing it too, and that's definitely the more you can work in your timber, you're going to help that. Like you said, by hinging it and letting trees fall down in there, you're just creating that much more cover. But in the last 2 years, I have not done any of that, no.
So you mentioned the fact that some of your neighbors are doing these kinds of things. Do you have are a lot of the people in your area actively managing for deer, or are you surrounded by just farmers who don't really care about deer?
Both. Right now, most of the property around me has been bought up by guys that are really serious about it. This land costs a lot of money anymore, so anybody's going to spend $3,000 or $4,000 an acre for deer hunting ground is pretty serious about it. So
Yeah.
They're not going to go in there and just shoot the small ones. They're wanting to do what's right, let them get to the proper age. But then you got the farmers that are here and they're old school, and that's just the way they were raised, is to shoot anything that comes by, and they don't really care about it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, being in a situation like that, or in the situation where you are surrounded by people managing, there's a lot of people I complain about my situation sometimes, being that I'm surrounded in most areas by people that don't manage and the challenges that come with that. But I'm curious, are there any challenges that you face because you're in an area with intense management all around it, or at least in the spots that you do have like that? Are there any unique challenges to that situation?
Well, years ago, I used to be the only one planting and leaving food. So I could pull so many deer from so many properties. Now all these guys have gotten smart on these food plots, and they're leaving the grain standing until, March or April or whatever. So I'm probably pulling only half the deer I used to pull. So the biggest thing I can see is, I'm next to guys that are managing. If they're not shooting 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, that's great. But then again, they're planting the same amount of food that I am, so they're really limiting any deer coming on my property that live over on theirs. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Is there anything you can do? Is there anything you do to combat that? Are you thinking through ways to fill gaps that they don't, or anything along those lines?
I plant everything there is. I just try to do a better job than they do. Yeah. A lot of times these guys aren't really good farmers, and they have crop failures, and so I just got to hope for a crop failure on their side of the
fence. Yeah, and hopefully you get all the rain and they don't.
Yeah, some of these food plots, you wouldn't believe the money a guy would spend on P&K and fertilizer and lime and doing everything you can to maximize that acres, because you know how important it is to pull those deer in.
Oh, yeah. I only have a couple of acres I can plant, and I know the costs add up on that pretty quick, so I can't imagine what people with much larger areas, what types of costs those accrue.
Exactly. I think we've had like 100 acres of food plots total.
Oh, wow. It's a significant expense, I imagine.
Yeah, probably at least $300 or $400 an acre costs you to do those on corn anyway.
Wow. Yeah. So another thing on this topic, I read an article from a number of years ago, I think, and I think it might have been written by Mike Hanbeck or someone like that, and he had talked about a situation with you where you had, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong if you remember this, but I think you had owned a farm or a property where you had been hunting and managing it for a long time, and then you had bought or gotten access to another farm far away, and on that property you ended up killing a giant buck on that property that you had seen a long time ago on your old farm, but now he was over on this new one. And the point of this article, I believe, was that that maybe there was so much competition on your heavily managed property that some of these bucks were dispersing to new places. Is that something that you have to think about?
That is absolutely something to think about. We're raising such a staggering number of 3-year-old deer. There's 150s literally all over the place. So there's such an intense competition. The first thing that happens, a doe comes in. Well, my biggest buck, my 6-year-old or whatever, he'll bump the first doe out. He'll go over to my neighbor's property that don't have any deer. So actually, some of my biggest deer get bumped over onto my neighbor and get killed just for that reason. One year, I lost 5 190s to my neighbors just because of that. And, I'm thinking, well, I've got the best food. I got everything over here. Well, that's the problem. I do got the best food, which is holding all the deer, making the fighting for the doe so intense. I mean, everything's fighting to the hilt, so they're wanting to get off of here during the rut. So that's the bad part about it.
Wow.
So with your 4,000 acres that you have access to hunting, that makes it seem like you're not taking enough deer off the property. How many deer would you say you're taking off that 4,000 acres in a year?
Well, that's another problem, is you got so many bucks that need to be taken that are cull bucks. I'm talking 5 and 6-year-old deer that are only scoring 120 or 30. And we've got plenty of those, and it's very hard to get somebody to shoot those for you. Nobody wants to waste their valuable Iowa tag on a 130,
Right.
In the past, we can shoot plenty of does. We've shot, the last year they allowed us to shoot does, we shot 54 does, which we need to at least be shooting 50, 60, 70 a year, just to keep up with the numbers.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing, is keeping your doe numbers down. But the problem with Iowa last year is they had that big EHD breakout, so the DNR took the tags away from this whole state and didn't give any tags.
Were you affected by that at all, the EHD?
No, I wasn't, and that's the problem. I wasn't even affected by it. By them taking the tags away, now I've got my doe numbers skyrocketing again. So it's kind of a bad deal because you know what the high deer numbers do to you. It's not a good deal.
Have you been in communication with the state of Iowa, the DNR, and saying, hey, look at, like, show them proof and say, look at my property. I need to take more deer off of it.
Right. Well, in the past, like I said, they give you the bonus tags in January. It's almost unlimited. I think they gave like 800 or 900 in Decatur County, but there were still tags left. I went in and bought 54 tags myself. So in the past, you could buy basically unlimited tags, but then that EHD thing happened, and they kind of capped that. So they know there's a need for that, but there's so many people in the state that was squawking over, low deer numbers this year.
Yeah, it makes some unique challenges, I think, for people in that type of situation for sure.
Well, especially when you are managing your property for deer hunting, you have the availability to hold deer. You're planting the food plots. You're probably leaving some of your crops up, and other people in your county aren't doing that. Thus, they're seeing low deer numbers, and you're probably at the far end of the range because of what you're doing.
Right. Absolutely. I don't know if there's no perfect answer to it, I guess, but Iowa does a lot of great things, so I'm not going to say anything bad about that. It's probably one of the best states as far as a deer manager goes. But like I said, you got so many of these bucks that need to be shot. They're 4, 5, 6-year-old deer, and that's what we're running into. We're getting too many of those and causing the genetics to, in my opinion, to go downhill a little bit.
All right, we've got one more break in the action here for a word now from our partners at Huntera Maps. And earlier this year, we first discussed Huntera Maps, but if you missed that segment, Huntera is the producer of super high quality, custom physical maps for serious deer hunters. And these maps come in sizes ranging from fold-up waterproof field maps to huge wall-size maps to put up at deer camp. They're all really awesome, but what they all have in common is high-end aerial imagery of your hunting property with an added terrain layer, which allows you to see very clearly the actual topographic features that are present. Now, with that said, I recently got to chat with Ben Harsheim, the founder of Huntera, and the story of how he started this company was so interesting and honestly gutsy that I had to share it with you. So here's Ben explaining how Huntera came to be.
So, Huntera actually started in 2010. I made a map for my dad as a Father's Day gift at the ground that I grew up hunting back in western Pennsylvania. There's no ag anywhere, and looking at the property just from an aerial photograph didn't really tell us much. It was just a sea of green. So I figured out a way to put terrain into the imagery. And that all of a sudden showed us all of the terrain features that matter to us, like the ridges. We hunt a lot of saddles in Pennsylvania, benches, old logging roads, those sort of things. And that was truly a game changer, not only for us as hunters, but also for my future. So fast forward 3 years later, I was 80-hour work weeks were becoming the norm. I was the senior cartographer at the National Counterterrorism Center, and staring down the barrel of a full-time career path in the Washington D.C. area. And at that time, Huntera was really rocking, and it was one of those deals where my wife, she came on board to help me out, and we just got exponentially more efficient, more productive. That was the fall of 2013, and over the wintertime, we really thought about it long and hard and decided, we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here to try to pursue and grow something that really matters to us. So in June of 2014, we packed up and uprooted and sold our house and pointed our headlights west to move to the Midwest and really pursue Huntera and give it literally everything we had. So that's how it started.
So how about that? Ben gave up a big-time job in Washington, D.C. to move cross-country and make the best dang physical maps for serious deer hunters. That is pretty cool in my book. So if you're interested in learning more, go to huntera.com. And now, back to the show. Yeah, and on that topic a little bit, I haven't necessarily been lucky enough to enjoy this problem myself, but in these places where you do have a large number of mature deer, but like you said, some that maybe genetically aren't going to amount to maybe a larger deer. Do you have issues with like these bully bucks where you get a 6 or 7 or 8 year old buck it's a small buck that maybe you're not interested in targeting, but he's such a nasty, dominant buck that he's bumping away all your 3 and 4 year olds with great potential?
It happens all the time. It seems like those are the ones that set up camp and run everything else. You're big, a solid, massive 140-inch deer, and that's all he's ever going to be. But here in the last few years, it seems like I'm the one that always has to shoot all those, so that's kind of not fair to me. But
it's a burden you have to bear.
I can't take it. If it's a 6-year-old big bully deer, I'll fill my tag with him and go on. I can get 3. So if 2 of them happen to be a coal buck out of mine, then that's fine. It's making your property better that way, at least.
Yeah.
You only got so much room in the house, right?
That's right. Exactly.
That's really funny you mentioned that, Dan, because literally today when I was driving home from where we were out camping this weekend with my wife, she asked me who we had in the podcast, and I mentioned that you were on the show today, Don, and she's seen a few of your shows and stuff when I watch it, and so she told me to ask this, and I don't think she actually thought I was going to ask, but now I am. She said she wanted to know, what do you do after, decades of hunting for big bucks when you have so many big deer mounted? Have you got to the point down where you just don't mount any more deer, or are you building new barns to put up your mounts, or how do you handle that problem?
Well, it's a problem. We got them stacked all against the walls. There's nowhere left to put them, but either we have to build a building, and actually Kenny and I, we don't mount them anymore, and at least they're at least 170.
Wow.
We've said if they're not 170, we're just not going to mount them. It's like, where do you put them after a while,
Yeah. I'm trying
to... Good point. They're stacked everywhere. Trust me.
I don't know if my wife will be happy to hear that. She probably wanted to hear that you just stopped totally. Now I'll be able to tell her that, we got to vault the ceilings and we got to build a new addition to the house.
Exactly.
That's funny. So what about, continuing down the line here, different tactics that we're using? You mentioned access and entry routes, and you've already talked about using ditches or creeks. Do you do anything else to create, ideal access or exit routes? Any other tricks that you're either doing with habitat or with, using buddies to help you get in and out? Anything else you're doing on that front?
No, we like I said, not only hunting the corn, but I actually will plant corn as a blocker just to get into my tree stand sometimes too. Some of these farms, you're on top of a bald knob. You cannot even get into this farm without blowing it out. So I found that I'll take my planter down the ridgetop, plant whatever, 12, 18, 24 rows of corn, and I'll kill the 2 rows in the middle, turn them off. So I can actually take my buggy. You can drive right down the middle of the standing corn, and nothing even knows you're there. You can drive within 50 yards of your tree if you want to, not to be lazy, but it helps everything on getting in and getting out of your tree stand. So that's just one way we do it.
That's awesome. Now, speaking of standing corn, I don't know if you have this challenge or not, since you get to control. I think, from what it sounds like, you get to control what's standing and what's not. But a lot of guys, when they've got, 100 acre to farm or whatever it is, they're one or two places they can hunt. When there's years where all the corn is standing around them, you often hear about, well, all the bucks were in the corn, so they couldn't see anything, during the rut or whatever. Do you have, do you think that's a real issue? Is there an issue with when they're standing corn, those deer are all going to be there and you can't see them and hunt them? And if so, are there any tricks to pulling off a successful hunt when you're surrounded by standing corn?
That's a good question, because it's unfair, because I have a combine and I go in there and I'll cut out the end rows if nothing else so I can see the dang things.
Yeah.
But to somebody else who has nothing but big blocks of standing corn, it's going to be a big deal. Like I said, for the last 15, 20 years, I'm a farmer, so I don't let that happen to me, because I go in and harvest half of it or whatever I need to. So it's really never been an issue.
Okay.
All I can tell somebody is get as tight as you can, and they're not going to stay out there all day long. Yeah. Especially if it gets real wet and muddy in the fall, they're not going to be laying out there in the mud. So,
right.
I don't hardly feel that every deer in the country is going to be out in the standing cornfield. So,
yeah. So calling then comes to mind for me, because I've heard lots of times maybe you can call or rattle them out of the standing corn if you can hear them running around in there. What's your take on rattling? I'm curious. Is that something you use a lot? If so, what's your strategy?
Everything's changed with that. When we first started years ago, we rattled in all kinds of big bucks. I first started with, like I said, Mark Gurry and Jay Gregory and all of them, rattling deer in. And just so many people are hunting now, and the deer are so much more educated. It's 10 times harder than it used to be. I'm not going to say I don't rattle bucks anymore. I do. I don't do it blind rattling like I used to. I have to have a visual on the deer. I have to know I've got a good wind before I'll hit him with it so I can see his reaction, to see if he turns inside out or, kind of read his body language and see what's going on. But more than anything, other than the rattling, we'll use grunting more than I can anything that I can think of. I have more success with that now.
So what type, just a soft contact grunt? Are you snort wheezing, or what are your typical grunts you're using?
I mean, I've done it all. I've snort wheezed him in, but anymore, I'll just throw the tending grunt, and try to get his attention. Once he whips his head at me, give him one more. If he doesn't commit, then don't keep grunting at him. Don't keep hammering him with it. They'll become suspicious real quick. But I always carry the rattling horns with me. You've always got situations like 2 years ago, I remember a big booner. He had just lost his doe, and he's running around everywhere trying to find her. Well, that's a perfect situation. Man, we hit the horns together. Here he come, walk right under the tree. So without the rattling horns, we wouldn't have killed that deer. So even though it's tougher than it used to be, it's still a must to have them on you.
Yeah. You mentioned wind, the right wind to call or to rattle. I think I know what you're meaning by that, but could you explain that a little further? What's the right wind to call or rattle with?
Well, it's pretty simple. If you've got a wind that's quartering towards the deer, you're just a fool if you grunt or rattle at him, because all he's going to do is obviously come to the downwind side, because you're making it easy for him. He has to find out who that is before he walks in, so he's going to walk down, smell you, and he's out of there. So make sure the wind is at least, quartering to you, hitting, blowing back the other direction. But the thing we do to combat that, a lot of my stands actually backed up to a fence. They'll be to a creek, a big drop-off, so they can't circle you. They'll have to come in and have to come underneath your tree to check you out.
Yeah. That was exactly what I was thinking of when you said that. And actually, I was just going to ask you, do you ever set up stands specifically to prevent that? So it's interesting that is something that you're proactively doing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've done that for years. We used to have, my favorite stand was called the railroad track stand. There's a big woven wire fence and a big weedy field, and every deer you rattle at, they come up to the fence, turn, walk right down the fence right underneath the tree. So, yeah, that's a great tactic.
Wow. What about doe and estrus bleats? Do you ever use those?
I throw a little bit of everything at them. I just watch the deer and see what happens. I'm not going to say I do it all the time, but if there's a call made, I'll try it.
Okay, it's in the repertoire.
Yep.
So
if this doesn't work, I'll try that.
Fair enough. So what about decoys? If we're going on down the different list of potential tricks, are you a decoyer?
I've done it. It's another one of those things. We've got so much camera gear, so much equipment to carry in, camera arms and all this stuff. That's a lot when you start taking a decoy too. The main problem I always had with decoys is I'd have a deer come in, they'd see the decoy, and immediately they see it, they draw a circle around your tree, and they go downwind and smell you and snort. So I've never been a big fan of decoying, but obviously it works, so
yeah,
it's not something I've done a lot of.
Are you taking any scent control tactics, or are you using any sprays or clothing or stuff like that, or are you strictly wind?
No, I'm strictly wind, but I do everything I can. I mean, it's not saying everything works perfectly, but you're crazy if you don't try it. I wear the scent lock clothes. I have the wildlife research spray. We try to stay as clean as we can, and on top of all that, then I make sure the wind's perfect anyway. But if you get swirly winds, by wearing all this and using the sprays, you can get by with it a lot more times than if you wasn't using it. I can guarantee you that. Yeah,
it definitely pays to minimize the risk as much as possible, at least.
Yeah, and then my wife's wearing makeup, so that doesn't help. So.
Yeah, that is the one thing that you can't say no to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Every time I get winded, I blame it on her because, well, it's your makeup, man.
Do you have any interesting question here? Do you have any other challenges, given the fact that you hunt or film with your wife a lot?
No, we do pretty good together. We've been hunting together for so long, we know each other. I would say it's not anything more difficult. She knows how I react, and I know how she does. I help calm her down. She helps calm me down or whatever. So it's actually a benefit, I would say.
Nice. I know I've been testing the waters, trying to get my wife out there. She's gone turkey hunting. She's into fly fishing now, but deer hunting we're still working on. But the makeup thing I think would be a tough deal too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, starting on turkeys, that's always something good to start with. That's where Candy started. So
yeah. So
it's tough to get a woman out there in 20 below zero, and man, isn't this fun? Yeah.
See, that was my mistake. The first time I ever tried to get my wife out there with me, we were hunting in Illinois, and I asked her if she would come with me on the trip because I had to go by myself, and I asked if she would film me. And so we went out there, and it was during the rut, or late rut, I think it was like November 20th or something like that, pretty late, and I had to hunt, and I had to have someone filming. It just so happened that the first time she went out, it was like a cold front just hit, so it was in the 30s or maybe high 30s because it was like a mix of rain and sleet and really windy and about as miserable conditions as you could ever ask for, and that was her first experience, so I've had a hard time getting her back out.
Well, I can imagine. That's right.
Yeah. So another thing that's been on my mind that we've kind of talked a little bit about when it comes to timing is something that we talked a lot about last week with Mark, and it's predicting deer movement. Looking at different types of conditions and then anticipating how the deer might or might not move based on those conditions. So I'm curious. We had this big conversation last week, and I'm curious to see what your take is on some of these things we discussed. So how about we start with barometric pressure? Do you see any impact on deer movement from barometric pressure, and how much attention do you pay to that, if any?
Yeah, I mean, definitely they act different on all barometric pressures and all this stuff. But there's so many factors, some fronts moving in and moon phases. There's so many different things. It's almost confusing. It doesn't matter. I'm out there every day anyway, so I really don't care. So do I look at the pressures and I hunt different? No, I really don't look at that any different. I'm going to be out there anyway. So that doesn't really affect me.
Okay.
The only thing I do I would love hunting in any kind of precipitation. If it's a light, misty rain or snow or whatever, the deer just move awesome in it. So anytime you can get any kind of precipitation, I love that.
Yeah, me too. Is there ever too much? I mean, when it comes to, from what I've seen, like you said, light rain, light snow is great, but maybe, heavy downpour, not so much. Have you seen that too?
Yes, for sure. We got the immersed up blinds we hunt out of, so we've hunted in heavy downpours, and we don't see anything. But the light mist and just drizzle, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
They really let their guard down that type of weather, I think.
Yeah, it seems like they might just, and I think it might have been our guest a few weeks ago, John Eberhardt, who had mentioned that his belief was that some of these deer might actually, and maybe or maybe not, they make this connection, but because when there's lots of rain or different precipitation like this, there's not as much human activity, that maybe then the deer begin to feel more safe in those conditions. So
I agree with that.
Yeah. So moon phase. I know you said you don't pay attention to this a lot, but do you have any take on moon impact on deer at all?
I'm totally opposite everybody else. I've killed so many deer on a full moon. And then you hear everybody else say, "Oh, full moon, they'll be feeding all night. You won't see nothing." But I love a full moon, so I don't know if I'm hunting different than the other people are, during that time. But give me a full moon, and like I said, I've killed so many deer. I can't say nothing bad about it.
Man, it's funny you say that.
Are you focusing? I guess let's talk about time of year for a second and where you're focusing your attack. Let's say we're getting now into like the later October, right before the rut kicks in. Where are you focusing your attack throughout the rest of the season then?
Well, right when you're saying late October, your very first does are going to start cycling, so you've got to target your main doe groups. They may not have been a mature buck there in the last 2 weeks, but during that time there will be. So if you got the does, you're going to have the deer. So that's what we target. Those big doe group areas and the big doe bedding areas. Because in the mornings, them bucks are going to be cruising through there like crazy.
And then how about the lockdown phase? Do you believe anything in regards to that period of November typically? Have you seen that happen by you?
Yes, I hate it.
So how do you handle that?
Go do something else. It's really tough. That lockdown phase, now it can be a perfect time to stalk one, which we've done several times. If you can spot one locked down with a hot doe, it's you're in for a good hunt. But other than that, you can pull your hair out. There's a 10-day period, like on this farm here, when they lock down, you might as well just stay home. Because I don't think I've hardly ever killed a deer between that 5-day period, the 10th to the 15th. That's about during November, the 10th to the 15th to the 20th, or something like that is when they usually just lock down very hard. But then about the 20th, they all start coming back, and checking the last few does, and that could be another hot time.
Yeah.
I got a question to piggyback off that. You just mentioned the second and third week, basically, of November. Maybe the first week of November and the third week sounds to me like it's where you do a lot of your focusing on, and then that second week is kind of a dead spot. Do you think a lot of hunters are getting into the timber too easy? Let's say a guy has a week or 2 weeks of vacation to spend deer hunting. Do you think guys are getting in the timber too early in November instead of maybe saving it for the second and third, or third and fourth week in November?
Well, for some of your bigger bucks especially, that Thanksgiving time can be fantastic. But I've told people, years ago, the best time in Iowa was always November 1 through November 8th. You can't miss. But, that can be tough because one of these mature bucks can not lock down with a doe, but they can find the first alpha doe, follow her around for a week, and it still becomes very hard to get a mature buck. Here lately, my favorite time is late October. And I've swung it back to, believe it or not, October 20th through November 1 is some of our best times to get on some of these mature bucks.
So why do you say that, Don?
Because they're not following a doe yet. They're still in that feeding pattern, and they're just now starting to check those doe groups out. And lately we've been targeting the food plots. We've been brushing these blinds into the corn. And that's just when we've been killing our deer, in late October now.
Yeah.
Now, Candy did kill her booner this year. It was during that Thanksgiving time, and that was what happened. He was with a hot doe. She wasn't in yet, but she was close, and he followed her in right in front of the blind. So if I had to pick, my pick now is late October, and then, like you said, the third week in November.
Yeah. What about the timing of the rut? If we're talking about November and the great times to hunt during November, the ongoing debate is, is the timing of the rut in the Midwest the same every year, or does it vary? What's your take on that?
It's pretty much the same for me. I don't think I've ever seen it not on fire November 5th. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, or if I had to nail it down to 4 days, you can't miss there. By the 10th, they're starting to already lock down. So you better have your big buck on the ground by then, because then it gets darn tough for about 10 days.
Yeah, they start getting a little bit tougher to find. That's for sure.
Yes.
So I've got a couple final questions for you, but Dan, do you have a final question for Don before we wrap this up?
Of all the years that you've been hunting, is there any strategy? I like to ask this question to every guest we have, but is there one thing you would recommend for a hunter to try to do, and then one thing you've learned over the years that a hunter should never do? Like, what have you learned?
Well, that's a tough one. What a hunter should do. There's so many things. How do I narrow that down?
What's something that maybe you live and die by every year?
Well, believe it or not, I know some of the biggest bow hunters there is, and some of these guys don't take binoculars. And I've always thought, how can somebody hunt without glasses? Believe it or not, there's hunters out there that do not take binoculars with them. So that's the first and foremost thing. When you're trying to age these deer and everything, make sure you got your binoculars with you. I know that sounds a little crazy, but there's people out there that don't take them.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you identify a deer? You don't know how old he is or nothing about him,
Gotta
so that's
have
kind
those.
of one thing that.
And now one thing that maybe an example of a mistake that maybe you kept making and then you finally learned from, or something over the years where it was maybe like an aha moment where you're just like, oh, that's what I've been doing wrong all this time.
Gosh, I've done every mistake in the book. Which one do you want?
The most embarrassing, please.
Yeah, I've done everything. Boy, just to narrow that down to one thing, it'd be impossible for me. Seriously, I've done everything wrong, but to help somebody out, maybe just the way people blatantly get into their stand in the timber. They walk through they have no access, no way in or out to not be seen, smelled, and everything. Some people think you just stroll through the woods and climb your tree and climb out. I don't ever set a tree stand up that I can't get in and out of with hopefully a deer smelling me and seeing me.
Yeah, that's such a, it's so easy to say that. I mean, I've had the challenge of, I know this, like I know you need to have great entry and exit, but then the actual execution of it sometimes is a lot harder, because there's those, times when you're late and you just got to get home and you're rushing and you want to just blast through the timber to get back or whatever it might be. It's really hard to have the self-discipline to always do that. But I think I'm glad you mentioned it, because it's one of those things that we always need to keep in mind, and we always need to remember how important it really is.
For sure. Some people's hunt is over before it ever started just because of that.
Yeah.
Because they gave no thought to entry or exit.
Yeah. You have to. I like your idea about planting the standing corn to aid in that. And like you said earlier, ditches, creeks, all those things, and really factoring in your entry and exit, even when you're thinking about setting stands. So
right.
I guess then that leads me to another question, Don. If you have a situation where you've got a great stand location, like you say, I want a stand here, but you just can't find a good way to get in and out, will you just ignore that tree and not hunt that spot, or will you risk it every once in a while, even though you know your entrance or exit isn't good?
Well, there's ways around that. If you know you cannot get out of there, especially late season, we'll actually have somebody come down on the tractor and blow the deer off and pick me up and get me out of there. So if it's farm vehicles or whatever it is that they're used to, you cannot be caught climbing out of that tree and blowing that field or climbing out of that blind. You got to do something. You got to make some kind of plans to get out of there.
Yeah. That's
probably ruined forever.
Yep. I like that tag team approach, getting someone to come help you out.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the standing corn for all of our blinds, even tower blinds. I plant standing corn in front of the tower blind and leave it standing just so I can get down the ladder and get out of there in the evenings.
Yeah. I think if I've taken anything from this, well, I've taken many things, but one thing is I really need to get a farmer friend who can help me plant some corn.
Exactly right.
I think it would help me out a lot.
It's a great mix, being a farmer and doing the whitetail thing, trust me.
Yeah, you've got a good situation. And that kind of leads me to what I want to be our final question. And I've gotten a ton out of this, so thank you, Don, in advance. And my question is this. Like you said, you have access to a pretty large amount of land, and you're hunting heavily managed property, and so your situation is probably different than what some of our listeners have. Right. That said, I would venture to guess that a lot of what you've learned in all of your years of hunting and what you take from where you hunt now could be applied pieces and parts to different situations. So my question is this. If I were to pick you up off of your Iowa property and put you on a piece of public land, let's say somewhere in Iowa, and you had a 7-day vacation to hunt that piece of new public land, could you walk us through, what your mindset would be and your process would be for figuring out and hunting that property over the course of 7 days?
Absolutely. I'm like everybody else. I started hunting public land before I got this farm, so we killed plenty of big deer on there, especially in Iowa. Public land was awesome about 20 years ago. The first thing I did on all this public ground, I'd go in, grab the map. I would find the farthest corner from any of the access points that anybody else had, because generally 90% of your hunters are lazy. They're not going to walk any further than they have to. You got to get in the extreme back corners of this thing and get away from the people. In that situation, you're not so much hunting the deer as you're hunting the people. So you just got to find that spot that the people aren't getting to, and you can get into some action that way.
Yeah. Now, are you going to go, we've heard different theories on this. Some people will, dive right into their best spots if they had, this minimal piece of time, 7 days, or do you like to take a couple days to observe from a distance until you figure things out? What's your take on that? Would you just dive right in?
I'm still a big advocate of staying backed off at least one night, one morning or two, from a big observation point, see what's going on first before you dive in there, because you may have one chance, and by that one time you saw this buck do that one thing, you could kill the deer. I would scout 3 days and hunt one if I had a choice.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and it sounds painful for me, but I imagine it's probably good advice to sacrifice a little hunting time to make sure your hunts are quality hunts over quantity.
Right, exactly. Well, like I said, you're talking mature deer after. If you mess that deer up one time, it's over.
Yeah.
In that spot anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Final question. I said that was my final question, but now I want to add one more. Do you have a single hunt that you look on as like your favorite hunt or the most meaningful buck or most, is there any kill that sticks with you the most?
Probably one of the kills that sticks with me was the big not typical I killed 213 years ago. I don't know if you saw the footage ever. It was because my wife filmed it, and she actually rattled the buck in. He comes in at 35 yards. I ended up shooting a little bit low on him and just took the hair off the elbow, but I thought I double lunged it. Well, the deer comes in further, and I looked over at Candy. She was filming it, and she was white. And I said, well, what's wrong, And she ended up hit the record button. She didn't get the record button on.
Oh, no.
She hit the record button off on the first shot, but luckily the buck came in, and I got actually 2 more shots on that deer. And she got it on. It was terrible footage, but it was just a cool hunt, and it was one of my biggest bucks ever, so that one kind of sticks in my head.
Yeah, I think I did see the footage of that one, and that's I can see why that would be memorable. That's a pretty incredible deer and hunt. So, well, this has been great, Don. If anyone out there is listening and wants to learn more about Whitetail Freaks or what you guys are doing, where can they go online to get that information?
Just whitetailfreaks.com. It gets you to, we're on Twitter and Facebook and all that, so.
Awesome. And then what about on TV right now? I think your new season is airing now. When and where is that?
Yep, it's on Outdoor Channel, obviously. It is at 6:30 Friday evening. Oh, I'm sorry, 6:30 Monday evening, 5:30 Friday evening, and then 4:30 in the morning on Thursday.
Okay. And is that Eastern or Central time?
That's Central.
Central. Okay, perfect. Well, we'll make sure to include all that in the blog post for this podcast. So if you're listening and you didn't get that, make sure to check it out online, and you'll have all the information there. So, Don, thank you for your time. This has been really interesting. I know that both me and Dan will have some interesting things to parse through, and we all, I'm sure, will be able to learn some things from this. So we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us, Don.
Hey, and
Thank you, guys.
If you ever need someone to come kill some does off your property, you just holler at us.
Hey, you're the man. You're invited already.
All right. Careful what you say. All right, Don. Well, good luck this season.
All right. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
All right. And with that, we are going to wrap up today's show. Now, a couple quick updates from us here. We talked about the Sitka photo contest going on right now, and we also just launched a little weekly giveaway related to photos for Wired to Hunt. If you're on Instagram, every Wednesday we are now doing the Wired to Hunt Wednesday giveaway, where if you post a hunting related photo on Instagram on Wednesday using hashtag Wired to Hunt Wednesday, you'll be eligible to win a Wired Hunt decal and some other cool Wired Hunt swag. So make sure you post your pictures on Wednesdays with hashtag Wired to Hunt Wednesday. And otherwise, if you're not subscribed yet to the podcast on iTunes or through Stitcher on Android, make sure you do that. It makes things a lot easier, as you'll get each week's new episode straight on your phone or mobile device. So, with all that said, we do want to thank our partners who help make the Wired to Hunt podcast possible. So big thank you to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Lacrosse Boots, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And finally, thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully you learned something from this. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to Don and us chat here. And of course, we hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.